Welcome to this Premium Explainer. Today we're going to be stepping into the shoes of a senior medical professor to unpack the incredibly high-stakes science of forensic pathology. Specifically, we're diving into Chapter 9, the final document. We're talking forensic autopsies, exhumations, and the very precise, heavily scrutinized art of death certification. You see, this isn't just about basic anatomy. This is where clinical medicine collides head-on with the law, a place where a single sloppy stroke of a pen can quite literally let a murderer walk free, or conversely, bring them to justice. So let's just jump right into things with a real-world scenario I like to call the poisoned patriarch mystery. Picture this. A wealthy 70-year-old patriarch passes away suddenly at his home. His longtime family physician comes by, takes a look, and assumes it's just natural causes because, well, the guy's older, right? The doctor quickly writes up a death certificate stating the cause of death as 1A, heart failure due to old age. The patriarch is buried with full honors, case closed. Or so we thought. 2 months later, an absolute explosive family dispute erupts. One son officially accuses his own brother of slipping arsenic into their father's tea to speed up his inheritance. Suddenly, the public prosecutor orders the deceased to be brought back up from the grave. And this raises two massive high-yield questions for us. First, how on earth does a forensic pathologist extract the truth from a heavily decomposed body that's been buried for months? And second, what catastrophic professional error did that family physician commit when signing the original paperwork? Here is our investigation syllabus for today. Number 1, the poisoned patriarch mystery. 2, decoding the forensic autopsy. 3, exhumation and the grave. 4, mastering the final document. And finally, 5, tech, truth, and resolution. Section 1, the poisoned patriarch mystery. Section 2, decoding the forensic autopsy. Right off the bat, there is an absolutely critical distinction we need to make between a clinical autopsy and a medical legal autopsy. If you're an attending physician and a specific medical treatment fails, you might really want a clinical autopsy just to research what went wrong. But here is the major exam point. That requires mandatory written consent from the family. If they say no, it's a no-go, period. A medical legal autopsy, on the other hand, is mandated by law. It's triggered by unnatural, suspicious, or sudden deaths. It's ordered directly by a public prosecutor or the police. And honestly, family consent is completely irrelevant. The law takes over. Once that medical legal autopsy is officially ordered, the pathologist can't just wing it. There are incredibly strict, standard steps they have to follow. First up is the external examination. This means meticulously checking clothing, looking for tattoos, any traumatic wounds, and noting postmortem changes like rigor mortis. Next is the internal examination, which involves complete evisceration, systematically removing and examining the internal organs. And finally, we have specimen collection. This is the crucial step where we harvest blood, cerebrospinal fluid, urine, and stomach contents to send off for advanced toxicology. Keep this step in mind because this is exactly how we're going to eventually catch our patriarch's killer. But hold on, before we even think about collecting those toxicology samples, we have to follow an absolute, non-negotiable law of the autopsy suite. We call it the golden rule. All 3 body cavities must be opened. Let me be clear, there are absolutely no exceptions to this in a medical legal context. It is a must. You might have a skeptical student or a really aggressive defense attorney asking, hey, why did you cut open the skull of a victim who very clearly died from a gunshot wound to the chest? I mean, you already found the bullet in his lung? Well, a smart defense attorney could stand up in court and argue that the victim had actually suffered a fatal, spontaneous brain bleed minutes before that bullet was ever fired. To produce a legally airtight report that proves the case beyond a reasonable doubt, pathologists must unequivocally prove the brain was completely healthy. That ensures the gunshot was the sole exclusive cause of death. And that, my friends, is exactly why the cranial, thoracic, and abdominal cavities must always be examined. Section 3, exhumation and the grave. Okay, so let's talk about exhumation. This is the lawful unearthing of a buried body for medical legal examination. As you'd expect, the legal requirements here are incredibly strict. You absolutely need a valid court order, you need the physical presence of police or judicial authorities, and you need flawlessly strict grave identification. But look closely at that last point. It is a super common misconception that there's, say, a 6-month limit on exhumations. In reality, there is no specific statutory time limit. Exhumations can legally be performed decades after a burial, which turns out to be incredibly useful for long-term heavy metal poisoning investigations. And that brings us to a massive clinical pearl. If you suspect poisoning by a heavy metal, like arsenic, during an exhumation, you're obviously going to extract bones, hair, and nails for testing. But you must also collect a control soil sample from the dirt surrounding the casket. Why? Because a good defense lawyer is going to argue that environmental arsenic, which is naturally present in a lot of cemetery soil, simply leached into the dead body over time. By testing a control soil sample, you anticipate that argument and completely destroy it before they even bring it up. Section 4. Mastering the final document. So the absolute academic crux of all this is understanding the World Health Organization standards for the certificate itself, specifically sections 1A, 1B, and 1C. To lock this into your brain, I want you to use a memory enhancement technique. We call it the falling tree analogy. Imagine a huge tree falling over in a storm. Line 1A is the immediate cause. Think of this as the leaves and branches finally hitting the ground. It's the final terminal lethal event. Line 1B is the underlying cause. This is the trunk snapping in half, the root injury or pathology that actually initiated the fall. And then line 1C is for contributing causes. This would be the strong wind or the poor soil that weakened the tree in the first place, representing chronic conditions like diabetes or hypertension. The rule is you must always backtrack logically from the final event all the way to the root cause. But wait, what about the mode of death? Where does that go? Going back to our analogy, the mode of death is just the sound of the crash. And here is a catastrophic pitfall you'll see on sloppy paperwork all the time. Everyone makes a sound when they fall, just like everyone's heart stops when they die. The mode of death is just the physiological derangement, things like cardiopulmonary arrest or hemorrhagic shock. You must never write this as the actual cause of death. Let's actually compare correct versus incorrect documentation to see this in practice. Under the wrong documentation side, you'll see things like cardiopulmonary arrest and old age. This is exactly what that family physician in our opening mystery wrote down, and it's a huge error. Old age is not an acceptable medical pathology, and heart failure is just a mode of death. Now look at the correct documentation side. You see real, tangible pathologies, a massive hemothorax, which was caused by a ruptured aorta or a penetrating stab wound, along with a contributing factor like type 2 diabetes. That is exactly how you write a legally binding, scientifically accurate certificate. Section 5. Tech, Truth, and Resolution. Now, stepping into the 2026 updates in forensic medicine, we actually have some incredible technological tools at our disposal before a scalpel is ever raised. First is Virtopsy, or virtual autopsy. This uses post-mortem CT and 3D surface scanning to create immaculate, non-destructive 3D reconstructions of things like bullet trajectories or occult bone fractures. It totally respects the dignity of the deceased while providing airtight visual evidence for a jury. We're also using post-mortem angiography. By injecting radio-opaque contrast media into the vessels, we can identify tiny microaneurysms that a traditional physical scalpel dissection would actually just destroy. It's honestly a completely new era of evidence gathering. All right, with all that knowledge, let's finally solve our poisoned patriarch case. Months after his burial, the forensic pathologist performed a legally sound exhumation. Because the soft tissue was heavily putrefied at this point, they brilliantly bypassed it altogether and extracted the hair, nails, and bone, tissues that naturally resist decay. They also remembered our clinical pearl and carefully took a control soil sample. When the toxicology report came back, the truth came out. They were massive, lethal concentrations of arsenic embedded deep within the keratin of the victim's hair and nails. And crucially, that control soil tested completely negative. This definitively proved the poison was ingested prior to death. It didn't just leach from the graveyard earth. So the supposedly natural death was scientifically reclassified as a homicide. The greedy son was arrested, and that family physician faced an intense, career-altering negligence investigation. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. A sloppy death certificate literally allowed a cold-blooded murder to go unnoticed for months. So what is the true power of the final document? It's not just bureaucratic paperwork. It is the ultimate form of medical accountability. It literally speaks for the dead when they can no longer speak for themselves. I really hope this explainer has given you a profound respect for the high-stakes world of forensic pathology and the absolute critical importance of getting the science and the documentation exactly right. Thanks for joining me on this case, and stay curious.